welcome to another episode of Wall Dropping History. I am your host, Mr. Waldrop, and I will be talking today about the human immunodeficiency virus. So that is what we're doing today. So one of the things I wanted to basically say is thank you all for showing up. Thank you for participating in your education today. I love having you here. We're going to do a little bit of a different format today. So we have been doing these in Nearpods, but I have had several boo-boos run-ins with Nearpod. So if you're watching this after it has gone live, right? If you're watching this in Google Classroom or as a lesson after the fact, you're going to notice that it has been converted into a Nearpod. But at least for the live stream, we're going to do this a little differently. It's going to be different for a couple reasons. One, I don't really trust Nearpod. They've been kind of bonkering out on me. And then secondly, I think this might help the flow of the show. So rather than me posting a slide and everybody stopping and waiting to answer the questions, it allows me to keep going and then go back and read the answers, because there is a lag, right? I don't know if you know this watching at home, but there's about a 30-second lag from when I'm actually recording to when YouTube is actually streaming, right? So we're going to try a little bit of a different format. Rather than answering the questions in Nearpod, I'm going to ask you to answer the questions in the comments section in YouTube. Okay? So do me a favor, when you go to answer the questions, instead of answering them in Nearpod, because there's no Nearpod code, answer them into the YouTube comment stream. And of course, you can leave comments, you can elaborate, you can kind of do as your heart's content, because you can answer multiple times and stuff like that. So I think that's going to make it flow a little bit better. I do want to go over the agenda real fast. Okay, of course, today we did Greek mythology. You can go back and check out that episode on Monday. China was on Tuesday. We talked about the Song Dynasty, which is kind of that classical era of China. You can go back and see Tuesday's episode. And of course, today is Pandemic Wednesday, where I always try to tackle a different topic pertaining to a pandemic in history. What can we learn from that? How does that relate to the pandemic we're dealing with today? How does that all flow together? How does that all work? So, and then also, so tomorrow we're going to talk about Southeast Asia, and then Friday should be a really fun episode, 2000s culture. This will be the culture of when y'all were probably very little kids, so you should probably get a good kick out of this. Maybe we'll talk about some cartoons and stuff from when y'all were very little kids. So that should be a very fun episode. Okay, so with that out of the way, we're going to go ahead and start talking about the topic. As we get into it, though, I do want to point out, obviously there's a lot of news that has come out about education, how that's going to work. I'll dive into it a little more. You can go ahead and submit your questions if you want. I'll dive into that a little more after the lesson is over. But yeah, so basically it sounds like we've called it. There's no school. We're done for the year. Now, that is not the same thing. Let me say this. The school building is closed for the year. He has said it is up to the parishes how to deal with education. I know that we're definitely looking into doing remote learning. So let me put that asterisk on. Physically going to Broadmoor High School is done for the year. School is not done, right? If that makes sense. If you can get those two distinctions, right? Like the academic school year has not come to a close. The physical building has closed, right? Okay, so we got all that out of the way. All right, so again, if you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments. We'll address them at the end. All right, so today we're talking about the human immunodeficiency virus, okay? And what is it, right? So it's really two different species of lentivirus. I'm not going to pretend to know exactly what that means. But it's a strain of virus. Of course, you can see the picture of it. This is obviously using computer enhancements under a really powerful microscope. Now, over time, they will eventually cause immunodeficiency syndrome. Okay, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. So I want you to think of it this way. It's like, having the flu is the illness. The coughing and sneezing are symptoms of the illness. Does that make sense? Okay, so basically in a nutshell, the disease is this virus, right? What it does is it kills your immune system, and that's the symptom of the virus, right? So AIDS is not the disease, but rather a condition caused by the disease. And of course, you can see a body that has been infected with the AIDS virus. The HIV virus. Now, how does a virus work to begin with? So let's rewind time just a little bit and explain how a virus works. So you can see through this little GIF down here, a virus will enter the body and it will seek out a cell. And of course, there's different ways that a virus can enter the body. We know that through coronavirus, it can be airborne, it can be transmitted that way. The HIV virus is actually through the blood. So there's different ways viruses can transmit, right? Now, when a virus enters a cell, it either has DNA or RNA. It's only going to have one. It's not going to have both. And it will inject its DNA or RNA into the host cell. And it will tell that cell to make more of it instead of whatever it is that cell's supposed to do. It programs the cell to self-replicate, and eventually the cell bursts with tiny little baby samples of the virus that go into another cell, and so on and so forth, doing the same thing. Now, once the cell has made enough of the virus, again, it explodes. Now, the cell dies, and its new offspring goes on to infect another cell. I already said that. Okay, so your body has two ways, really, of dealing with this. Now, I use this in a broad sense. We have other ways too, other defense mechanisms, but these are the two big, broad ways that it deals with most of the foreign bacteria, whether it's bacteria, even pollen, viruses, you name it, right? And that is using white blood cells. So think of white blood cells almost like is your police force, right? They're the cops on the street enforcing the laws. They're dealing with the on-the-ground, day-to-day minutia of maintaining the peace, right? If those can't get the job done, right? Let's say, you're thinking about this terms of the cops, right? And you got the cops, and they're trying to break up a crime, right? But then it soon realizes it's going to be something like we talked about with Waco, Texas, right? Where, okay, this is way too big for your local deputy's sheriff's office to deal with this kind of major situation, right? For those, your body has special cells called T cells. So think of this almost as like your FBI, right? This is when your body escalates it to that next level. This is the stronger, if you will, body defense mechanism to deal with the big stuff, right? So when you say get coronavirus, your body's gonna summon those white blood cells to try to attack the virus. When it isn't able to fight it off alone, right? Maybe the virus spreads too fast or it's too strong. It's going to call in these T cells as like the elite commando units, right? So if you've ever watched Cells at Work, you can kind of see the comparison, right? Now, these cells are able to specialize, right? They will kind of format themselves to uniquely fight the specific bacteria, virus, or whatever, right? So they become experts at fighting this virus. So the kind of question I ask you is, what is the worst time you have been sick, and how did it make you feel? So leave that answer into the comments of the YouTube comments. There's no Nearpod today. Leave them in the leave them in the comments section of YouTube. Too many C's. So for myself, I know that I've had. There's a lot of speculation going around of who may or may not have already been infected with the coronavirus. And I know there was a period of time where everybody in my house got sick. We all got sick. If you remember, I came into school that one day, and I was out for like 2 days, and I was out for strep throat. And the thing that was funny about it is I've been out for strep throat plenty of times. I've had strep throat plenty of times, but it's never been to the degree that it felt like it just put me on my butt. For 2 days, I was stuck in bed. I couldn't even wake up for 2 days. So that's probably the worst time here recently. I know probably the worst time I've ever been sick was, I know one time I went to Indonesia, and, I've kind of got this mentality of when in Rome, I do as the Romans do type mentality. And so in Indonesia, they eat a lot of rice, a whole lot of rice. And so I ate a lot of rice too. And my Western American palate just could not handle that much rice. It got stuck in my intestines, and I basically had to spend about a week in the hospital with an IV drip. It was really, really painful and tough. So leave your response in the comment section in YouTube. Oh, see, Raleigh said she had flu last year. By the way, let me give my shout-outs. I don't have Nearpod up, so I can't see the list of all the names. Thank you for joining us, Rachel. Thank you for joining us, Alfondro. Thank you for joining us, Quinn and Raleigh. Thank you all for joining us today. Let's see. Got a fever last year and made it really hard to breathe. Ooh. You know, I'm wondering if you did you get it near the end of the year? Because, you know, there's a lot of speculation. A lot of people might have had corona and didn't know it. So I'm kind of curious when you got that, if it was really hard to breathe. There's a definite symptom of had the flu. It made him feel horrible. Yeah, my daughter had pneumonia recently. It was kind of crazy. So, yeah, be sure to leave that. Now, these T cells, this is a computer-enhanced image that they took under a microscope of T cells actually attacking cancer cells. So these are the ones that would attempt to help you fight off cancer. In the middle of last year. And here's an actual enhancement. I'll make this center screen right here. Of what it looked like to see these white T cells attacking cancer cells. I thought that was kind of neat. Now, here's what makes the HIV virus so deadly. The HIV virus attacks T cells, right? Some viruses seek out specific cells. This one goes after T cells. So they're literally like the killer of your virus killers, right? So in doing so, it uses your body's own strengths against itself, because when your body gets sick, it's going to start making more T cells. Well, that becomes a problem, because as your T cells die, it makes your body weaker to other different diseases. And so your body's really got a natural thing about it where it's really fascinating the way your body works. As your body loses T cells, your body kind of understands it needs to make up the slack, right? It doesn't want to get sick. So your body will actually just make more of them, right? But in a way, that's good news for you. It means you can have HIV virus and still function as normal. In fact, you can go for years not understanding you have the HIV virus. You're still fighting off. You still get the flu and fight it off. Maybe you don't fight it off quite as fast, but you still fight it off. And so you don't even know it, right? So that's good news for you. The bad news is this. As your body is making more T cells, it's giving the HIV more land to grow HIV, right? It's like, think about it almost as a farmer. You're giving it more land to grow crops and thus produce more. And the thing I kind of think of, it's almost kind of like the Borg, right? It was one of those, like it just kind of came in and just, the more people you sent at it, the more people it would assimilate and create more Borg, right? For those non-Star Trek nerds, the kind of, I guess, better one, I was really looking for a gift of this. Is, you ever watch those old cartoons where, you know, somebody's in a boat and, you know, like Yosemite Sam is using buckets to get the water out the boat, and then another hole pops and he's just doing more buckets, and another one pops and he's doing more buckets. Well, the boat isn't sinking until eventually it reaches a tipping point, and then the whole boat just sinks, right? It's kind of like that, right? So why do you think this is so dangerous for a community as a whole? You know, and I kind of go into detail about it, this is where it gets really, really deadly, is you can have it for years and not know it, right? So the entire time you have it, you could go around infecting, theoretically, dozens, hundreds of people, you know, depending on how you're infecting people. One of the ways, and we're going to talk about this later, is it was really bad amongst heroin users. They weren't using clean needles, so they would use a needle, they would shoot up, and then their buddy next to them would use the same needle to shoot up with. And in doing so, they were spreading AIDS from one another. Another one that's kind of real deadly and real scary is blood transfusions. Before we knew to start testing for this, there were people that were, you know, for whatever reason, right? Maybe they're just anemic and they get a blood transfusion, and next thing you know, they're HIV positive. So this could be really deadly for a whole different manner of reasons. all kinds of different reasons that could make it really deadly. So leave your comments in the section. Why do you think this virus is particularly deadly for the community? Now, as your body begins to step up production of T cells, you're able to live for years without being infected. So this is an example of a picture of somebody that became HIV positive. Now, as time goes by, you're going to start losing weight because your body's just burning calories, making more T cells. And you're going to start noticing you're getting really fatigued and tired. Now, it may not be that stark a difference, but you can kind of see the difference it made. Now, as your body is no longer able to keep up the condition of having AIDS, as your body is no longer to keep up, right? It's not making enough white blood cells. It then undergoes a condition known as AIDS, right? That means your body no longer has enough T cells to fight off infectious disease. This means that your body is missing its greatest weapon against serious viruses or bacteria. So most people that get HIV do not die from HIV. What they die from is all the other disease that now they don't have a ability to fight off. In fact, tuberculosis is a very common one to kill people with AIDS. So in the comments I see, because you can pass it on to someone else, and they can pass it on to somebody else, and they can... great point, Mr. Rodriguez. Senior Riley says, spreading it easily and not knowing it for a long time. That's right. Okay, so Quinn, that's true for it can be the coronavirus is spread by airborne, but the HIV virus is going to be actually spread through the blood. So you can breathe on somebody and you can be infected, won't hurt them at all. Okay, so the question I have is, have you ever lost or known someone have HIV? And if so, how were they treated? Or maybe you've lost somebody to HIV. I have actually known a few people that have had HIV, and it is a very scary thing to have, right? I mean, you're in constant fear. Are you going to live? And we're going to talk about the numbers later on. Then we're going to talk about some of the bigotry and stigma that they're going to have to go through. Things like, there's a lot of homophobia involved with this, which we're going to talk about later. But there's a lot of bigotry they have to deal with. So if you have known somebody who's had HIV, leave your comments below. I will read those out. I'm curious to see what y'all have experienced, see if anybody has had it, that they've known that has had it. Now, when a virus first jumps species is when a virus is often the most deadly, right? We see this with the swine flu. We have seen this with COVID-19. We've seen this. We talked about the bubonic plague with the Justinian flu. That was it jumping from the fleas in rodents, transporting the blood, so it jumped from rodent to human. Again, avian flu. And that's usually... Now, why is it the most deadly? Well, you got to understand, a virus doesn't want to kill the host. That's not its goal. If the virus kills its host, it can't spread, and it just dies off. Right? So if a virus will enter your body and 24 hours later you're dead, then the virus dies with it and it doesn't have time to spread, right? So through what is the word I'm looking for? Genetic modification, selective breeding, right? Kind of through selective breeding, the virus will kind of weaken itself because the weaker virus is more able to procreate, and thus more of its genetic material is going to get shared, right? So here's where it gets really deadly. The HIV virus can infect you, and it doesn't need to weaken. It's never needed to weaken. We talk about COVID-19 because it's the 19th strain we have diagnosed of the COVID strain, right? We're still on HIV-1. We're still there, right? It hasn't needed to weaken. It doesn't need to. Right? Because you can spread it for years. So it actually has no reason to weaken whatsoever. That's one of the problems we're having with COVID-19. It hasn't needed to weaken. A lot of people can have it, particularly younger people, and go days without knowing they have it. And because it's so easy to spread through airborne, they can spread it to dozens of people. And nobody know the better, right? So that's one of the reasons why it is so deadly, right? So kind of the question I asked y'all, and I'm curious what y'all think about it. Obviously, it's impossible for you not to be afraid of this thing, right? I'm not going to tell you. You see a lot of people to try to calm kids, tell them it's going to be okay. And look, it's going to be okay, right? We're going to get through this. America will rebound. You've not set your last foot in a school. We're very resilient people. We're going to get over this, and technology is fantastic. We're going to come up with a vaccine. However, one of the things I'm kind of curious about, you see in the media and the news how susceptible the elderly are to getting this and dying versus what percentage of younger people pass away from it. And I want to, we talked about this earlier. I want to make sure it's crystal clear. The COVID-19, it can kill people your age, right? So definitely be afraid of it. But I guess my question is, what scares you more, getting it or getting it and spreading it to somebody you care about? I constantly think about it in terms of, I imagine most of y'all's parents are about my age, maybe a little older, maybe a little younger. Or some of y'all may be having grandparents in the house, something like that. And I'll tell you, my parents, my dad just turned 70, and it scares me. I don't want to think about somebody. We were actually walking the dogs last night, and I was kind of doing the math in my head, and I was like, they say somewhere around 60% to 80% of the country is going to end up getting this. And they talk about how deadly it is for the elderly. And then I try to factor in what our mortality rate is. And I started doing the math, and it was like me and my wife kind of came to the conclusion of like about 1 out of every 25 people we know potentially could be at risk of losing their life, And I'm like, well, there's way more than 25 people I know that I care about, like way more. And so that's one of the things that really scares me, and it keeps me up at night. One of my students may be getting it and passing away. So, I think I'm with Mr. Raby. I'm more scared of, and how it'll affect the economy, right? So, there could be somebody right now starving to death. They don't have COVID-19, but they're still hungry. So, that's more the part that scares me, is its impact on others. So where did it all start? Well, it all started off in West Africa. And it was a mutation of the simian immunodeficiency virus, so SIV, not HIV. It began to infect people as they began to hunt chimpanzees for food. So in West Africa, there was groups of bush people that would actually attack chimpanzees for food, right? I know that sounds crazy, like how can you eat chimpanzee, but you'd be shocked some of the foods that different cultures eat, and some of the foods that they look at us like we're bonkers for eating. So, but anyway, so in that area they were hunting chimpanzees. Well, as they would get the blood on them from hunting it, getting the meat out, it would get infected into their wounds, and eventually, or maybe through ingestion, and eventually the virus would mutate to infect humans, right? So the first case we have these are in the Congo in the 1920s. The Congo had a massive problem with being used in the sex trade. So there's a lot of sex trade, people coming in buying women for sex slavery or prostitution, so on and so forth. So it uses that to spread out of the Congo at the time, right? Now, one of the areas it's going to infect is Haiti. It just ravages Haiti because Haiti has a lot of different business interactions with Africa. So it's going to get into Haiti, and in the 60s, it begins to ravage the island of Haiti, right? Massive amounts of people are getting it. So when the virus comes back with them, they begin being blamed for the origin of the virus, right? Everybody starts talking about it as the Haitian virus. Obviously, you're going to see them being targets of racism, considering the most prominent cases were Africa and Haiti, which are usually most of the heavily populated areas of black people. So they begin the targets of racism. And one of the questions I kind of ask is, why do you think they use the virus to promote racism? Why do you think they would do that? Why? I mean, obviously the virus doesn't have any kind of agenda. It doesn't have any kind of it doesn't care about race. But you're going to see it started being promoted, racism promoted. It kind of reminds me of thinking about, when everybody started, or there was a lot of people calling it the Asian flu for COVID-19. And there was this thing of like, it's all China to blame, and I'm not going to get into all the politics of that, but I kept thinking, I was like, that's so odd considering, at this point, there's so many people I know, white, black, and otherwise, that are getting the virus. I don't know if y'all saw the news, but they were showing that like 70% of the deaths in Louisiana were in the black community, which is bonkers when you think of the fact that the black community makes up only a third of the state. So yeah, it's definitely not an Asian virus. It doesn't care about a race or anything. Let's see. Let's see. Rodriguez said he's more worried about spreading it to somebody he cares about. Let's see. So is Quinn. Let's see. Oh, Rachel says she's worried about spreading it to pay the bills. Yeah, that's something scary. The question of how does a lot of people pay the bills? That's a huge one. Because it started from a specific country, such as most people call COVID-19. That's right. Yeah, because it started from a specific region. And Mr. Raby says he's mostly afraid of the aftermath and how it's going to affect the economy. That's a good point too. Like we're gonna have a different America. They're saying we're going to have to practice social distancing now for years. How's that going to make classrooms work when you got all these students crammed together in this tiny little room? So there's a lot of questions to answer. Raby puts in a point too that I want to point out too. It's a great point. Ignorance and fear, right? The virus is adding fear and people want to scapegoat. So that's a great point to make. So in the 1980s, in the gay community in 1980 in New York and California, they start noticing this thing called Kaposi's sarcoma. Sorry, I'm not a doctor, so I don't know all these medical terms. Which is a very rare cancer. It's a lung infection, in a very rare lung infection called PCP. Were being diagnosed, right? So they're like, why are we having this really weird diseases just emerging, but only in the gay community? Because they're not transmitted through being gay, right? So by 81, they begin suspecting there's got to be some other disease that's causing people to have this weakness to other diseases in general. So it was first called names relating to the word gay. In fact, the common name for the HIV virus before it was known what it was the gay plague. So in 82, it started to being referred to as the gay plague. So there was this assumption that, well, the reason it came here is there must have been a lot of gay people in the Congo, then gay people in Haiti spread it to gay people here in America. So it's got to be, if you have HIV, you're tested HIV positive, it's got to be because you were gay, right? So you start seeing mass homophobia, right? Particularly if somebody's diagnosed with AIDS, then obviously they must be gay in a lot of people's eyes. In 82, they're going to start to realize, wait a minute, there's other ways this thing can spread also, right? It can be spread through people getting blood donations, right? Like, let's say you're hemophiliac, and you need like a transfusion, it can get spread that way. Heroin users. By September of the year, the term is finally released that it was the HIV virus, and we finally have a name for what is causing them, and it is AIDS. In 83, it is that the year the HIV virus is isolated and identified by the researchers at the Pasteur Institute in France. Now, it's one of those weird things where like we discover it and France discover it, but we discovered it at the same time, not knowing that the others discovered it. It's originally called lymphadenopathy. I think I pronounced that right. I hope I did. Or LAV, and the virus is then later confirmed to have caused AIDS. So why do you think they had such a hard time trying to understand why and how AIDS is killing people? And I kind of want to go back to that point I made earlier. Because you can have it for so long and don't know it. This is such a weird virus in that you can just be a carrier for years and not know it, right? And so it makes it really hard to try to track the pathology of where it came from, right? And then it becomes really hard to understand because my wife said, no, I didn't pronounce that right. But it becomes really hard to deal with as... it's one of those situations where most people aren't dying from the virus. They're dying from all the other stuff they get because they have a weakened immune system. So it becomes really hard to diagnose because, you have somebody die of tuberculosis, say. Well, your first assumption isn't, oh, well, they must have a compromised immune system that gave them tuberculosis. So it starts creating the situation where scientists start going, wait a minute, why are all these rare diseases coming back at the same time? So it makes it a really hard path. It's like the ultimate murder mystery, if you will, of viruses, right? So anyway, when scientists are working at the USA National Cancer Institute, finally isolate the same virus, they call it HTLV3. And they decide that HTLV3 and LAV are actually the same virus, right? So they both kind of figured it out all on their own, right? They both kind of came to the same conclusion at separate places, right? So in 83, the CDC lists the main at-risk groups, right? So these are the people that the CDC is saying, these 4 groups are the people most at risk to get the AIDS condition or the HIV virus. That is partners of people with AIDS, right? Obviously, right? If your spouse, your lover, whoever, if they have AIDS, they can transmit. By the way, it does not require gay sex. Heterosexual sex can also spread AIDS. Not as easily, but it can still do it. They decide people that inject drugs, hemophiliacs, particularly those that need blood transfusions, and people that have recently been to Haiti. So if you notice, those all 4 things are going to be things that start with H. So people begin to start calling it the 4-H Club, right? So, if somebody gets AIDS, they're going to start saying, oh man, he just joined the 4-H Club. Not to be confused with the humanitarian group, but the 4-H Club being people that are at risk, right? So homosexuals, hemophiliacs, heroin addicts, and Haitians, the 4-H's, right? So that kind of becomes this colloquial thing, right? When I'm a little kid, people would go, oh man, he's in the 4-H Club, meaning he has AIDS, right? And obviously, you're going to notice a huge response of kind of bigotry, and I kind of wanted you to see this, and I'm not trying to get political, but I want you to hear how we responded to this in the beginning under the Reagan administration. And I couldn't embed this video, or I would have, but I did want you to see it, if it will load up. Yeah, we're not going to listen to this commercial, though. Yeah, and those are calling it the gay plague, and they're laughing, right? This is a press conference with the press secretary, and they're just joking about it. Yeah, I mean, this just sounds like a bunch of guys joking, right? Of course, this plague is killing people. And it's going to go on and kill a lot of people. The gay plague, right? I mean, it's one of those, like, if you said it now, it would be a career killer in politics, right? There's no way you come back from that. But yeah, they're just going to very nonchalantly call it the gay plague. And they're just laughing about it and telling jokes. Why do you think people are so quick to promote this as the gay plague? Same thing with, it catching on to call it the Asian flu. We talked about the Spanish flu earlier and how it wasn't really a Spanish flu. Why do you think people are so quick to promote this as the gay plague? And I guess partly for me, my viewpoint is that because the gay community is so easy to discriminate against, right? Because for one, they are a minority almost everywhere on the planet, right? I mean, if you're thinking about in terms of racism, every race on this planet, you can go somewhere and that race is the dominant race, right? So if you're Asian, you can go to Asia, lots of Asians in Asia. If you're black, you can go to Africa and you will see countries where they make up the vast majority of the population. Same white people, plenty of countries. Hispanics, go to Mexico, mostly Hispanics. If you're Indian, you can go to India, mostly Indians. Everywhere on this planet, gay people are the minority, right? Everywhere on Earth, anywhere you go, they're going to make up the minority of the population. So I think it creates a situation where they're very easy to discriminate against, and because it's seen as, so easy to point a target on them, easy to scapegoat. I think you're all right on the money with that. And of course, everybody seems to want some kind of scapegoat. Because that's another one too. They're also hated in most cultures everywhere on this planet. I mean, you still see countries today. Iran claims they don't have any gay people. They claim they're without gay people, and partially because if you come out as gay, you're firing squad. So, because everybody wants somebody to blame, and they're easy scapegoats to blame. So up until 85, the government did not screen blood transfusions for HIV. So in 85, they would decide to ban all gays from donating blood. So if you've ever been gay, you're not allowed to donate blood. In December of 2015, not centuries later, centuries ago, we're talking very recently, they made that ban reduced so that no male or, they decided in 2015 that if you have had male-to-male sex in the last year, you cannot donate blood. It's got to be before that, right? So you still see a little bit of that kind of assumption that it's a gay plague even today. As the number of cases grow, the CDC begins to refine their knowledge that included discovering it could come from sex between a man and a woman. Okay, so that kind of dispelled the gay plague myth. However, a third of those being diagnosed with AIDS are still dying, right? So they're doing a better job of figuring out what causes it, but they're not figuring out a better way to treat it and stop death from happening, right? So why is it so important that the discovery, what was the discovery of it being possible to be transmitted between a man and a woman so important? When you think about it in this standpoint, I think it's important for a couple of reasons. One, it's good in that it helps us understand that, this is not something you don't have to fear, right? When I was a little kid, they used to have all these infomercials and stuff like that, right? So, I remember watching cartoons where they would have Michelangelo the Ninja Turtle come out and try and explain to kids not to share drug needles, stuff like that, right? These Saturday morning fight drug use type commercials, right? And it's really important because it keeps people safe, right? Thinking that, well, I don't have gay sex, so I can't get AIDS. That's a myth, and that helps people in that way too. I think it's also helpful in that it prevents people from thinking that this is a gay plague to promote bigotry, right? So it kind of ends that bigotry against the gay population. So I think it's both of those working in tandem. So that knowing that just because you're gay, you can still get it, right? Absolutely. So AIDS would begin to ravage the black community. In 1995, black people make up 49% of AIDS-related deaths. That's just unbelievable, considering they make up 12% of the population. They would be the most apparent as Magic Johnson is diagnosed as HIV positive. And I know that y'all are probably too young to kind of really appreciate Magic Johnson, but he was kind of the GOAT before Michael Jordan, right? Him or Larry Bird, one of the two of them, kind of made the NBA what it is, right? And so he kind of became the celebrity poster case for having the HIV virus in 91. What did you kind of hear his speech?
Well, let me say good after late afternoon. Because of the HIV virus that I have attained, I will have to retire from the Lakers today. I just want to make clear, first of all, that I do not have the AIDS disease, because I know a lot of you want to know that, but HIV virus. My wife is fine, she's negative, so no problem with her. I plan on going on, living for a long time, bugging you guys like I've always have. So you'll see me around. I plan on being with the Lakers in the league. Hopefully David will have me for a while. And going on with my life. And I guess now I get to enjoy some of the other sides of living that because of the season and the long practices and so on.
So this is going to hit center stage again as Magic Johnson will try to come back to the NBA, right? A few years later, he's going to try and come back. Now, one of the league's best players at the time was a guy named Karl Malone, and he becomes, I think he either won MVP that year or the year after. But anyway, he's going to be very outspoken against it. And I wanted you to kind of read his quote about the topic. And he says, "Look at all these scabs and cuts all over me," Malone says. The Utah Jazz all-forward said last Thursday night in the visitors' locker room at Madison Square Garden before a preseason game against the Knicks. It pressed a finger to a small pinkish hole on his thigh, and it was developing into a scab. "I get these every night, every game," he said. "They can't tell you you're not at risk, and you can't tell me that there's one guy in the NBA who hasn't thought about it." And so kind of my question becomes to you, do you think people that are HIV positive should be allowed to play sports? Is it a situation where, let me fix this. Is it a situation where you think it's a case-by-case basis, like maybe they should be allowed to play some sports? Like boxing, for example, would be one I think would be, controversial to have somebody HIV positive boxing, wrestling. What about basketball? Do you think basketball is okay? Baseball, where would you draw the line? Would you draw the line? And I'll tell you, this is something we still haven't quite figured out yet, but I'm kind of curious what y'all think, so leave your thoughts in the comments below. Do that. So in 1991, the world would be shocked at the first celebrity death as Freddie Mercury, okay, this is the lead singer of Queen, the "We Are the Champions," my friend, that guy, right? We gonna rock you. Anyway, Bohemian Rhapsody, they made a movie out of him. This would further increase bigotry against the gay community as he was bisexual. Of course, obviously in that era, if you're bisexual, you're gay, right? So it's going to increase the bigotry against the gay community and kind of feed into the, that it's a gay plague. And let me ask you, where would you, and the big question I want to ask, because I see where Alfano wrote in and gave his response. I'm kind of curious, where do you draw the line, right? Though, like, what sports would you allow? What sports would you not allow? I'm kind of curious what you think. Raby says, "I box, and there can be a lot of blood involved," right? So he wouldn't want to box somebody that's HIV positive. I think I'm kind of with him. I wouldn't want to box somebody that's HIV positive. Basketball, I think I'd be okay with. I'm not even sure about football. I've got a lot of scrapes and bruises and bumps and blah, blah, blah in football. I'm not sure. There's no definitive right answer, right? And here's the question I have, and it doesn't have to be of AIDS. Is there ever been a celebrity death that shocked you? And if so, who? Obviously, here recently, Kobe Bryant passing away. I think it really messed with my daughter, Stan Lee. She got to meet Stan Lee. Having him pass away was huge. Has there ever been a celebrity death that shocked you? I think Robin Williams really messed me up thinking about him. I think Carrie Fisher. I always used to joke that if there was ever going to be a movie in my life, I want her to play my mom. Because I think she kind of reminded me of my mom. But, what celebrity death really shocked you? And if so, who was it? I'm curious to see your comments and the thoughts in the comments below. Okay, so in 87, and I'm going to try and pronounce this medicine, azothiomidine became the first treatment for HIV, right? So this is not a cure, but the first treatment. It developed treatments to reduce, they developed treatments to reduce mothers giving it to their children. That was another problem. You'd have like somebody who was like a heroin addict. They would have HIV and they pass it on to their infant, which is horrible. In 97, an antiviral therapy called HAART, HAART, would become the new treatment standard and cause a 47% decline in death rates. And it's basically kind of like this combination of different types of reduces the amount of HIV in the virus in the body, reduces the risk of transmission, prevents HIV from advancing to AIDS, and protects the immune system. Bruce Lee's death, that's a good one. Stan Lee and the rapper XXXTentacion. Wow, okay, good ones. Very good ones. Yeah. And I'm probably not going to dive into this, but I guess y'all probably heard about, and we can talk about this later if you want to, the apparent homicide that happened yesterday with a senior at our school. Very tragic. I actually taught that young lady, I think, 3 times. So it was really, really tragic to hear that. Real sweet girl. I cannot believe that happened. But, so, it doesn't have to be a celebrity either. Okay, so in 2003, they developed a 20-minute test and made it where by 2010, over 20 treatments were available to deal with the virus. By 2017, use of drugs could stop the spread of HIV. Right, so we've made a lot of progress, right? I wouldn't say we have it cured, but it's not the death sentence that it used to be, right? So we've made a lot of progress for it. It's almost to the point now, if you're rich, you got a really good shot of surviving with it. One of the things they're looking at now, I was actually reading up when I was doing some research. They're trying to develop these things called like these mutant stem cells, right? And a stem cell is basically like a blank slate, like think of it like a sheet of paper. You can draw whatever you want on it. And basically they're going to kind of create these mutant stem cells to go in and find the HIV infected virus and go in there and kill the virus. We'll see if it works. They've had some cases where it's worked, so it's promising. So maybe we do come up with a way to cure AIDS. But it's definitely something we're going to work towards and we're not giving up on. All right, so by the numbers, today as many as 40 million people have the HIV virus. Okay, 40 million people right now. You can kind of see this curve. We're talking about flattening the curve. It's actually most deadly to younger people, people your age. Obviously, it's because, as a general rule, that's the prime years of people having sex, and it's most transmitted through sex. There's around 2 million new cases just last year. Nearly 1 million people died from AIDS last year, so we have not got this licked. And as many as 98 million have been infected total, with 42.8 million that have died. So this is a huge, huge plague, right? It's one of the bigger plagues in history. So why do you think AIDS is so scary compared to other pandemics like the Spanish flu? And why do you think that had gotten so little attention? And forgive the pun, but I mean, this one's kind of a sexy virus, if you will. It's a virus that adds sex to the equation. And, when you think about it, the hierarchy of needs, for the human race to procreate, we need food, water, and sex, right? It's in that hierarchy of needs, it's right there at the top, right? It's required that we have sex to procreate. Virtually everybody in their lifetime is going to have sex at some point. I mean, hopefully y'all are doing it in the confines of marriage. But it is something, it's like, imagine if you were to get the flu from, a deadly flu from breathing, right? That's one of the things that makes corona so scary. But, it's one of those, it's almost like the silent killer, It makes it where, I know that when I was a teenager, they were making AIDS so scary that it was one of these things where it's like the average person was now getting to the point where they were thinking, I don't know if I should have sex, or at the very least unprotected sex with somebody because I'm going to get AIDS. So it was a very scary virus, particularly how it happened, right? And the fact that you can have it and it's like a ticking time bomb that you live with for years and you don't know it, and even after you know it, you can live for years and years and years before it gets you. So it's got a lot of extra boogeyman factors involved that I think kind of make it really, really scary. But I'm curious your thoughts. Why do you think AIDS is so scary, right? Like, when I talked about the Spanish flu, I doubt anybody that watched that episode knew anything about the Spanish flu. If I brought up the malaria pandemic, I don't think anybody knew about the Justinian flu. But I think all of y'all have heard of AIDS. Like, I doubt very seriously when I was giving this lecture that anybody was like, AIDS? I've never heard of that. So what do you think makes it so way? Raby says, because it involves a component that we need to survive as a race. That's absolutely right. I think there's a huge aspect of that. So anyway, moving on. The risk of acquiring AIDS is 22 times higher if you're a man having sex with another man. It's 22 times higher for people who use needle drugs like heroin, stuff like that, people that shoot up. You are 21 times higher if you are a sex worker. So obviously this kind of goes without saying, nobody should be getting into the prostitution business. And you are 12 times higher to get it if you are a transgendered person. Here are some myths. I want to cover some of these myths. You cannot get AIDS from kissing. You cannot get AIDS from hugging. Let me bring this up full screen so you can get a good look at it. You cannot get AIDS from sharing food, insect bites, sitting on the same toilet, breathing in the same room, coughing or sneezing, or sweat. I know that was something else Carmelo talked about, is he didn't want somebody sweating on him and giving him the AIDS virus. So those are all myths, and I'll tell you, sometimes I still see these pop up. That somebody will have AIDS and they don't want to kiss them because they don't want to get AIDS that way, or hug them or something like that. So you can't get AIDS any of those ways. Okay. Here are 5 myths that also are from AIDS. It is not possible to live a normal life with HIV/AIDS. We have gone, and I kind of mentioned this, great strides to deal with the symptoms, so on and so forth. So, it's very possible, I'm not saying it's a goal, but it's possible if you were diagnosed with HIV to still live out a normal life through medicine and treatment. We already talked about you can't get it from sharing dishes. You can't have sex with someone who's HIV positive without risk of getting HIV. It's possible to have sex with somebody who's HIV and not get it. That's entirely possible. I wouldn't suggest it, but it's possible. Individuals who use drugs can only get HIV if they are sharing needles or syringes. No, that's not true. I mean, you can get it from any of the other ways to get it. And women who are infected with HIV/AIDS cannot have children without passing it on to their children. And of course, we talked about that too. There are medicines now to prevent that. Okay, how can it be transmitted? Let's talk about that. Oh, other ways too it can't be. Air, water, you can't swim in the same pool. I remember that was a big thing. You can get it through sexual contact. You can get it through needles or drug injections. And mothers can pass it on to the baby, both through birth and through breastfeeding. So those are all possibles. So what are some myths about AIDS or the HIV virus or about COVID-19 that you have heard? I'm very curious to hear in your comments below any possible myths or anything like that that you've heard, that you maybe you watched that episode on the COVID-19 where I brought in Dr. Chetta, and maybe you had some myths dispelled that way too. I know even some of the myths I thought were true have been dispelled from this as we've gotten more information. So yeah, leave some comments on the thing below and let me know what you think. And that's actually going to do it for this presentation. It was actually kind of a shorter one just because, I didn't go too far into depth on the things that I knew you already knew about. And I also wanted to leave some time at the end to answer any potential questions you had, questions about school, questions about the tragedy that happened yesterday, anything of that. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to leave it in the comments and I will go ahead and start answering those as you see fit. So go ahead, I'm going to give y'all a minute if y'all want to write some comments in the comment section. See if there's anything anybody wants to talk about. Give y'all one more minute, see if somebody writes a question. right. Okay, well, I don't see any questions popping up. Oh, okay. You can't have a close contact with anyone right now, such as shaking hands or hugging. Uh, yeah, you don't need to have right now with the COVID-19. Do not be in close contact with somebody. That's a big no-no. You don't want that at all. So that is absolutely true. You don't want that in your life. Absolutely. Uh, oh, there is a student. It's been all over the news, so I guess I can release her name. Quenisha Paul. She was a senior. I had her at least 2 times. I'm trying to remember if I had a third time. At first, they'd ruled it a suicide, and then it turned out no, it was a homicide, an accidental homicide. So yeah, it was really, really tragic. Yeah, it was terrible. It was one of those. It just messed. She's a sweet little girl, you know. Oh, yeah, I forgot to promote that. Rachel, leave a comment. What was it I was going to have them submit? I think it was art. Was it art? Is that what it was? I think it's what it was. I need to make a banner for that and go ahead and put it in Remind in Google Classroom. So, yeah, leave that comment. Yeah, it was on the news. Let me see if I can pull it up for you. Yeah, let me pull it up for you real fast. Let's see. Yeah, right here. An arrested man after deadly shooting at Lake Sherwood Avenue early Tuesday morning, April 14th. Officials with Baton Rouge Police Department say Keegan Valdry, 22, has been arrested and charged with a negligent homicide after the accidental shooting death of Quenisha Paul, who had been 18 years old. Police say the shooting happened around 12:45 in the morning, so that's like just after midnight, in the 12200 block of Lake Sherwood Avenue. Valdry was booked into the East Baton Rouge Parish Prison, and this is an ongoing investigation. So, yeah, actually, I found out when Bradford sent out a news to... yeah, it was on the news. So, yeah, it was. Boy, that it's never pleasant to find out that a student of yours has passed away. But boy, that one's always really tough. So yeah, that was kind of a gut punch. So, alrighty. Well, unless y'all have any other questions or comments. Again, if there's something I left out, something you want to ask about, shoot a remind to me. But if there's no other questions, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you again. I appreciate you showing up, dedicating yourself to your education. And for another episode of Wall Dropping History. Oh, wait. Any more updates about school? So yeah, updates about school. So the physical school building is closed, right? We're not going back to Broadmoor High School this year. Learning is not closed, right? We're still learning, right? We're still going to have class. I'm still going to do this. And they are going to open up J Campus at some point. Let me put grades in. So as far as I've been told, that's the word, that school is not over, but going to school is over, if that makes sense, if you get those two distinctions. And of course, as the parish makes further announcements and instructions, keep in mind, bear with EBR. They're catching it as it comes. Nobody expected this to happen, so everybody's kind of playing to catch up. So, anyways. Alright, so if y'all have no other questions, that's going to do it for today's episode of Wall Dropping History. Thank you for showing up and dedicating yourself to your education today. And for